Welcome to the Work is Weird Now podcast. Whether you're nearing retirement, entering the workforce for the first time, or caught somewhere in the confusing muddle in the middle, you're likely sensing it and you're probably living it. We know we are, and we want to know why. Listen in as we interview experts and everyday people like you to find out how best to navigate the ever-growing weirdness of work in the modern age. Welcome, everyone, to Work is Weird Now podcast. This week, we are very excited to have Slavina Racheva, who is a management consultant and AI enablement lead for Credera. She was formerly a digital product owner at Lloyd's Banking Group and digital performance director at McCann Bristol. She puts out a weekly newsletter on LinkedIn, which is how I found her, called The Week in AI, and is a thought leader more broadly on AI. In particular, she discusses a lot of the ethical implications of AI companies and does so in a way that I find really accessible and relatable, especially as a non-techie. So welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. And I'm really happy that that's how the newsletter actually comes across, because I think that is very much what I wanted from it. My role in general, the way I see it, is helping people make sense of AI, and hopefully someday help AI make sense, which is a slightly different topic. But yeah, that's very much what I want people to take away from any of my writing and from any of my content that I put out there, which is just how do we navigate an incredibly complicated and complex world that is shaping around us.
Yeah, I have to say, just from our 20-minute discovery call, you ignited so many different avenues of thought for me personally, and like they say, started to shine light on understanding it in just 15-20 minutes. So I know that this discussion, and if people then go on to sign up to your newsletter, will learn so much more. So yeah, I'm excited for our chat.
Yeah, and you bring a lot of much needed levity to the topic too. I think, there can be this tendency to be a bit doom and gloom about it, which is fair. But actually, it doesn't serve any of us to be alarmist. So I really appreciate the humor that you bring to it as well.
Thank you. If I could just share an anecdote on that. So a lot of people have been asking me, do I use AI to write? And I use AI to help me with summaries and to help me scope out topics and understand them better. But the reason why I don't actually use AI to write for me is because at an early stage in my creating all of this content and writing, I fed custom GPT a lot of my writing, a lot of my articles, and I gave it a draft for, I think it was a DEI focused article, and it spat out something so militant and belligerent and sardonic that it triggered a lot of self-reflection for me. I was like, okay, so this is how you see my writing, interesting. So I had to adapt from there, but yes, I'm glad that that's how it comes across.
Okay, well, we start every episode by discussing what our weird work moments of the week were. And so, Dan, why don't you kick us off this week?
Sure. So I've been taken aback this week because we started the podcast because a passion project. We want to start a podcast, and we've fallen in love with, the heart and the soul of it. But I think the past couple of weeks, we've both recognized that we really want to take this step further. And this week and last week, I've started to do a lot more research and put the wheels in motion for almost, I don't really use the word professionalizing it, but take it up to that next step. So that's my weird work moment. What about yours, Alice?
All the people who listen regularly are probably like, thank God they're finally going to professionalize it, or at least attempt to. So yeah, my weird work moment of the week was actually related to my daughter, who's 13 years old, and she is taking computer science in school, which is, I'm sure for most of us, we weren't taking computer science at age 13. So it's obviously a great thing that she's learning to code in Python, which means that I'm learning to code in Python, so I can help her with the studying, which is great. But what's interesting is she has literally no interest in it whatsoever. Despite being quite interested in maths, she has no interest in computer science at all. And for me, I'm like, this is really fascinating stuff, but I think that about everything now that I'm not learning it in school. And so I'm trying to get her more engaged in it. And she sort of has this attitude, first of all, that it's all outdated as soon as she learns it, which is probably valid. And the other thing is that she just keeps saying, well, AI are going to have all the jobs anyway. So what am I even at school for? What is the point of all this? And it's a really difficult thing to combat. It's a hard conversation to have. As Alistair said on our one of our previous AI episodes, there are no mental models for this future of work that they are growing into. And so it's a challenging conversation to have with them. It's hard to lead them at this moment in time. So maybe we can touch on that a little bit later. But what was your weird work moment of the week, Slavina?
I was actually going to, I prepared an answer. It was different from what I'm going to say now, but what you've both said has made me reflect on a different weird moment of the week, which is I had a moment, it's kind of recurring, it keeps on happening every now and then, which was I don't really know what is work anymore. And a lot of that has been brought on by AI and essentially just how much space it takes in my day-to-day life and the way that I use it. But what I mean by that is, and I'm going to give you a very specific example. So I spend a lot of time with AI podcasts, and I get a lot of my learning from AI podcasts. And I take transcripts, I take snippets, I take news articles around them, and I turn those into additional content. I turn it into content for my work. I turn it into personal content. But at the same time, I I onboard a lot of this information while doing completely different things. So I'm an endurance runner. I train for ultra. So I listened to a 3.5 hour long podcast on an AI manifesto the other day during training. And I was like, does this count as work? Because I'm running at the moment, but at the same time, I'm onboarding all of this information, which is then going to be condensed and summarized by AI tools that's going to allow me to not have to spend another 4 hours distilling this information, transforming it, summarizing it, writing around it. So is this work now? Am I working whilst I'm training? So it's just this blend, and I don't even see it. I know people love talking about work-life balance and setting boundaries between the two. And I'm not even approaching it in that way. I'm not saying that my work is seeping into my personal life because of AI's amplification of what we can do. But I'm kind of liking the fact that it's all quite fluid, and you can be doing one thing and then the outputs very quickly can translate into something else which is very tangible, and you can immediately share it with people. So that's my weird reflection. And what both of you said about professionalizing the podcast and then turning it into something bigger, and Alice, your daughter having to kind of adapt to this new future and saying, well, AI is going to do all the jobs. Well, yeah, all of that kind of blends together, and it's a strange moment in time, I think.
It is, and it does suggest, why are we not just pursuing the things that we feel most passionately about? Because those things you don't need to have work-life balance for. We talk about work-life balance in a context where work is onerous. It's something we need a break from. But actually, if we're all starting to just pursue the things that are interesting to us, I happily podcast all day, every day. It's my vibe, So it doesn't feel like work to me at all, though I assume technically someone would describe it as that versus life. So yeah, it's really, really interesting. The other question we ask is, are you where you thought you'd be professionally at this point in time, or not, and why?
Yeah, not something I had reflected on previously, which probably is a bad sign because I know people like having 5 and 10 year plans for their careers. I've done some career switching because I started my career in media planning and buying, uh, moved between agencies and client side, and then very intentionally started to shape my career and my engagements in a direction that led me closer to more of a data and marketing technology space. Um, but I think it's more where we are in terms of technological development and chance that's put me in this position where I'm now very much veering off into this AI space. And this isn't something I could have forecasted. So instead of going down a more linear progress path, I'm now kind of branching out, and none of us really know what this is going to look like. And there's so many different aspects of AI that you can go down. Like, I'm not a particularly technical person, I'd say probably more than a lot of generalists, but I don't come from a computer science background. I'm not a developer. I would love to be able to spend a lot more time in that space. And that would be very much a linear progression move if I were to start training as a developer. But there's so much more in terms of consulting and regulation, which could be seen as a different type of career progression. So I would say I'm happy with where I am. I don't know whether this is where I expected I would be. And I'm very, very glad to be able to do the type of role because consultancy is very, very broad spectrum of skill sets, and you get exposed to so many fantastic clients, opportunities, challenges, that it's really, really interesting space to be in. And when you overlay a brand new technology and having to understand how people use it, how organizations use it, how to train people up in it, and how to help people embed it in their lives, I'm just really, really happy to be in this space right now. And I'm just looking forward to seeing what happens next. I think it's all developing at a very rapid pace, and I'm just trying to keep up.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a lot of people that feel like that right now. But there is a sort of like, if you can't beat them, join them kind of attitude happening right now, I think,
Absolutely.
for a lot of
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
Joy to hear, because I know, like, growing up, it was careers were almost linear, and
Yeah.
it's not like that anymore. That's probably the normal part. It's not even the weird part, that careers, we don't know what way it's going to go.
I come from a family who had a very linear view of career progression. So my parents were, I'm Bulgarian. I grew up in Bulgaria, and my parents worked their way up from, I would say, blue collar into white collar, working class, kind of very linear management progression structures. And I think that's what they saw as success and progress, and that's what they wanted for their children, which was just a very linear movement. And like, you get promoted to manager, and then the next level and the next level, and just kind of having to break away from this structure, and understanding that work is, as we said, fluid and can be very many different things. It's been quite liberating as well. Yeah.
It's just remarkable that in 2 generations, when we broke the mold that our parents set, and our children will break the mold again. I mean, it's so fast, isn't it? The development and understanding and expectations of work has just evolved so rapidly, and will continue to do so. So just to speak to the obvious thing in the room, you are a woman, and this is a topic that isn't often owned by women. And I think that's maybe where we want to kick off the conversation, because what's become quite apparent to both of us as we started to explore more about AI and its impact on work is that despite some things that we're seeing in terms of statistics around women in the workforce and closing the gender gap, particularly among the younger generations, what is very apparent is that women are being very much left out in a variety of different ways from the AI revolution. And that's not just in terms of the bias that we're seeing built into the systems. It's the number of women adopting AI tools in their day-to-day work. It's women in the industry and being responsible for some of this innovation. So many different ways. So I'd love if we could just kick off with you kind of talking about where you see the role of women in AI and where we could potentially start to close some of those gaps and what needs to happen.
Yeah, that's a really good reflection. I don't want to be fear-mongering in any way. So I want this conversation always to be one that's focused on what can we change and what can we do in terms of specific actions. But to get to that point, I think we actually do need to bring a lot of visibility around the issue. And it's actually a bit wider than that even. So there's a lot of research that has gone into this over the last, I'd say, 2 to 5 years, because AI in its current form is quite new, but it's rooted in a lot of the tech and engineering kind of issues we've seen in the workplace in general. But apart from it just being an issue with female representation within the boardroom, within tech companies, the AI industry specifically, there's this combination of issues that are kind of creating a perfect storm of negative circumstances for women in this current moment in time. First one is that there's a significant proportion of jobs that are at risk of automation and displacement through AI. I think administrative positions, a lot of knowledge workers, a lot of support, customer representation positions, a lot of those, as we all know, are very much at risk right now. Even looking at things like replacing customer support with chatbots, that's something that's happening on a daily basis. And we're seeing a lot of redundancies being made in that general area. What's actually scarier is that around, I think different sources suggest different numbers, but between 70 and 90% of some of those industry-specific roles are actually taken up by women. So you see women overrepresented in customer support, in some of those knowledge work type of industries and roles, and that means that AI's impact on job displacement is actually more severe when it comes to women in the workplace. Then on the other hand, you have some of the things that you touched on, Alice, which is things like women appear to be, again, according to research, less comfortable experimenting with AI and slightly lagging behind in terms of AI adoption. Some of the numbers that we've seen is, I think, women being 20% less likely to actually use generative AI than men are, women being 20 to 30% more concerned in terms of ethics and the impact of using AI. And I think there was some numbers around, I think women in one of the latest studies represented about 40% of ChatGPT's global online users. And then when you look at some of the platforms which could be considered a bit more technical, such as Anthropic's Claude, which is more geared towards engineering use and things like that, the number actually drops down to, I think, about 30-35%. So you see women being at risk of displacement and at the same time not adopting the tools at the same rate, which could be due to many different factors, which we will go into in a second. And then there's the issue of representation. You see reports of, I believe, women shaping up something like 20% of the roles within the AI industry. And then when you start actually going up the ladder in terms of boardroom representation, that's between 10 and 14%. And all of that has a knock-on effect, because what we know about large language models, AI tools in general, is that they function off of the data that they are fed and off of the training that's built into them. And if you don't have sufficient diverse representation, and that's not just women, that's any kind of underrepresented or marginalized community, if you don't have that representation in those rooms where the development happens, where the training happens, the product development, the decision making, all of those factors are not fed in. So you end up with fairly homogeneous data or a homogeneous demographics view of what diverse data looks like, which is what I'm trying to kind of be very diplomatic around saying is you get a generally white, massively predominantly male view of this must be what diverse data looks like. Let's build that into the models. That's an oversimplification, but it is very much what's happening. And there's a lot of statistics that support that. I think one of the really, really shocking numbers I saw was that there's about 45% of AI tools and platforms exhibit racial and gender discrimination when generating outputs. There was a fantastic, really, really detailed piece written by Wired on exploring and testing OpenAI's Sora, which is their video generation tool, where they tested it against various different prompts and feeds. And essentially, whenever they fed it prompts such as generate an image of a doctor or a pilot, you get this stereotypical white male. When you say generate an image of a caretaker or a flight attendant, you get a woman. And also things like how they represent other marginalized groups. So, for example, if you want to generate a video of a gay couple, it was very much this stereotypical loving male couple sat at home watching TV, eating popcorn. It's like, no, people are diverse. People have interests. People are human. Like, we're all completely different from each other. Just producing continuous stereotypes isn't going to get us to a place where we appreciate and understand each other's differences and diversity. And even things like ableism were very badly represented in those studies. So disability was always represented as somebody in a wheelchair, which was very static and in no way considering any other kinds of, like, I don't know, learning or any other differences, any cognitive or neurodiversities that might impact somebody's experience of the world. It's very much just reproducing the same stereotypes. And when you go back to the point around, well, how does all of this impact women? I think there's so many things that, like, even if your experience with AI tools as a woman or somebody who is less represented in these communities is, well, it just perpetuates these stereotypes, and it just singles me out as other, or singles me out as a minority. You feel quite put off from interacting with these tools, and that does have a knock-on effect on your trust and your willingness to experiment and learn more. And I'm not saying that women are not taking up AI tools because they generate images of white male doctors. But there is something at the back of your mind which says this system wasn't designed for me, and this system is just based on the same perception that I've seen in society over and over again. And then when you understand that essentially the odds are kind of stacked against you, and the system is not being built with you in consideration, and there is no representation of you in these boardrooms and in these decision-making groups, and at the same time, nobody's really thinking about the knock-off impact of job displacement and the highly disproportionate risk for women, it just creates a very, very challenging situation. And that's something I'm very keen on exploring in general and bringing visibility to, because I would like to presume that there is no malicious intent. I would like to think that there is no malicious intent in the development of these systems, and this is just a result of ignorance. I think it's the Hamlin principle or something, which was presume ignorance, not malicious intent. So it's just happening because people didn't give enough consideration to this issue, not because people are trying to build negatively developed systems or anything like that. But that's why we, and by we I mean as a society, everybody has a responsibility to be extremely vocal about the need for regulation, the need of consideration around AI, because if this isn't brought to people's attention, they don't know that there is a problem that needs to be acted on. And you can't mobilize people around this. You can't help people understand how to educate themselves, how to actually invoke any kind of change and make progress in this space. And that's why it's very important to have conversations like what we're doing now at the moment.
It's almost as if there's been a sort of shadow society created that sits next to our society, but it's dated 50 years in the past in terms of perceptions and stereotypes and things like that, because it's almost reflecting a workforce that's 50 years in the past. It's white male dominated. There's a number of things to cover in there, but one of the questions I wanted to come back to is you mentioned the fact that there's quite a lot of bias built into the system is potentially turning women off from using it because they don't see themselves in it, and not just women, but other kind of conventionally minority categories. But what are some of the other reasons that you think women are not accessing these tools? Are there things around kind of women's general behavioral patterns at work that might impact why or why not they're accessing it?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. So we hosted an event a couple of weeks ago around closing the AI gender gap, and I was joined by a really, really fantastic panel of all female leaders, but just incredibly intelligent individuals who had very rich perspectives on this. And there was a great conversation that started shaping up in the room around why some of the attitudinal differences between male, female, and I recognize that there's other gender categories which we're not addressing, but that's because they're not represented in the research, not because we're excluding them. But in terms of the differences between male and female use, there were a lot of interesting perspectives brought in. One of them was very much around the concept of women don't want to be seen like they're lazy or they're cheating. And I think that is something that we're all very much aware of, and it's part of your training. It's part of you being brought up as a woman to never be seen like you are trying less. You always have to be putting 1,000% because you have to keep up, you have to compete, but at the same time, don't be seen like you're putting in extra effort because you don't want to be seen like you're trying too hard. But you have to be naturally smart, but at the same time, don't put too much work in because then you're too pushy, and all of those things. I think there's these behavioral frameworks that are inbuilt in our brains, which are like, well, you don't want to be seen like you're cheating, you don't want to be seen like you're lazy, but at the same time, if you're being too pushy and you're trying to drive things too fast, then you get negative reactions to that as well. So I think just navigating that in general is quite tricky. But I really, really like that point around women don't want to be seen like they're cheating because they want to be seen like their outputs are very, very, very thought out and researched and worked through. And I don't think using AI is cheating. If you use it in the right way, if you use it to augment your work, if you use it in a way that essentially makes your work smarter rather than this presentism notion of harder because there's a difference, then it helps you get ahead so much faster. And B, I don't think that this is the right way to approach this. I don't think that it's okay to see this as a shortcut for men and a way of being more efficient. But if a woman does it, then it counts as cheating. And I'm very much hoping that nobody outside our own female brains is really thinking that, but it still is something that is clearly ingrained because so many people brought it up in the room. The other aspect of that, which is also kind of related to the notion of cheating and using AI to expedite these tasks, was that, and it was a really interesting point that somebody brought up, which was women and men have different frameworks and understanding of ethics in general. And where men are maybe a bit happier to push the boundaries, women take a step back to evaluate and try and understand, oh, is this acceptable? How would I be perceived if I did this? What are the impacts? Who could end up being hurt or negatively impacted by me doing this, where men, because we've brought up men to be adventurous and aggressive, just like, oh, I'm just going to push this button and see what happens. And then that's not really an attitude that's been trained in at least me when I was growing up, and the women around me, very much not the same way. It was very much be a well-behaved lady, not that that succeeded, but be a well-behaved lady and don't go and take action that might be seen as not very thought through.
As risk. That really reminds me of the stat around women will apply for a job if they feel they can do 80% or more of the job description, but men will apply if they feel they can do 20%. And it's that whole risk challenge, rule bending, not cheating, but women feeling safer, not almost wanting to avert themselves in any way. And it's coming through in AI, which is just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Well, obviously for a variety of reasons. But I think there is a school of thought that says that eventually, once AI and automation and whatever's coming down the road, it takes over a lot of the knowledge work and a lot of the sort of jobs that we conventionally associate maybe with more masculine traits. And I say masculine traits because I don't necessarily assign those purely to men, but I think those masculine traits like risk-taking, like authority, those types of things, confidence, that kind of category of traits that generally sits under masculine. We're seeing a real sort of rotation towards those in this pursuit towards creating this AI future, right? There's a little bit of kind of Wild West cowboy attitude out there right now that seems to be generally being rewarded, possibly to the detriment of things like ethical decision-making and regulation. And we can talk about that in a minute, but just quickly on the gender thing first, I think what will be interesting is what the next stage looks like, right? So once those tools are... and tools probably is an underrepresentation of what they are. Once this seismic shift has happened in the world of work and in economy, we're going to be looking at those questions around what does then humanity do, right? Is the purpose of humanity? And that's when I wonder when some of those feminine traits might actually come into their own, right? Because then we're looking at things like community building and collaboration and ethics and all those pieces that maybe are more conventionally associated with feminine traits. And I wonder if there's an opportunity to sort of get women to not only adopt these tools and to use them more liberally in their work, but also to celebrate some of those things that might be currently being pushed down the ranking of importance, but might actually be more important as we start to see some of these things unfold. What do you think about that?
It reminds me of a quote I read recently, which I absolutely loved. There was an article in The Atlantic which looked at the HBO show Silicon Valley, which I genuinely consider a parody and a prophecy at the same time. And it addressed some of those issues around how do you build in these systems that have the ability to transform society. And the quote went something like, it takes a very special kind of paternalism to think that you can create a system that eclipses society and at the same time it helps to serve it or something like that, which is like you kind of saying we're going to completely destroy the foundations of society because they're based on work and equity and the frameworks that we've built around employment and day-to-day life. But you're also saying that it's going to serve us and it's going to make things better, but you haven't actually thought about what that's going to look like. And I think that very much resonates with what you're saying, which is we need to start building these groups, communities, societies that help us connect rather than be separated and fragmented through these systems. And maybe what I'm hoping is that AI could help us live in the real world a bit better. But I am not entirely optimistic in that space, if I have to be honest. I think there is a lot more thought into the systems and the why behind the systems and the why behind why are we trying to get to artificial general intelligence and artificial super intelligence that just isn't being addressed at the moment. I don't know if it's something you've maybe seen out there. I don't know if through your reading and research you found an answer as to how superintelligence is actually going to help build a better world. I've read all the manifestos and I can't really give you a tangible answer to that. And that's what's concerning me the most.
Yeah, I don't think any of us has these answers. I mean, I think even the people who are writing those manifestos don't have the answers. I think for me, it seems to boil down to we build these things because we can. And I think, we can't stop the pursuit of that ambition. I don't think progress will progress.
Yeah.
It very much feels like it is we will because we can. Because if you break it down to some of the components and some of the promises that are being made, it doesn't really make sense. And it feels like, yes, probably no technological development in any point of time could have been done in isolation from society. But especially when it comes to bringing a new kind of intelligence that could, or at least some people are assuming will be sentient and omnipotent and will be able to interfere with all our systems, you should be trying to align this to actually bringing on some kind of welfare societal improvements. But when you look at it from that angle, that really doesn't feel like it is the case. And there's some very specific examples, some of which might be a bit contentious, but let's try and explore them in a neutral way. If you think about the fact that we're saying AI is going to bring on better welfare and equity and just better social mobility, that's the ambition. That's part of Sam Altman's manifesto. If you read through all of that, he explicitly says that everyone's lives are going to be better and we'll all be able to spend more time doing our creative pursuits and everyone be happy. But at the same time, all we're seeing at the moment is job displacement. We haven't seen any governmental or even organizational level education, re-employment or upskilling systems or plans put in place. We've seen some tests in America, I think they were funded by OpenAI, around universal basic income, which also didn't produce the results that they expected. So even introducing a level of income that every single person receives, regardless of their experience or their employment, that still isn't enough to build a solid society that self-sustains. So we're not really seeing the welfare benefits pay off, and we're not seeing a plan of how that's actually going to develop. We're saying that it's going to improve education, but at the same time, AI is being used very much to cheat. And every single day, there's a new system that helps students cheat and really circumnavigate the educational process. So I genuinely believe that AI is invaluable to education, and it's helped me learn so much. But you need to reshape how education is done first and how kids understand its importance and its role before you start introducing these systems. And yeah, even science, like even things like, I genuinely believe that we've already seen so many cancer drugs and things like that have been accelerated through the introduction of AI because it helps synthesize this information, make it more widely available, allow researchers to explore topics that would have taken them months in hours and days. But at the same time, we're seeing education being defunded in certain governments and countries, and we're seeing people distrust science and distrust major scientific developments like vaccines, etc. So society and where we are in this moment in time and the development of such massively impactful and disruptive technologies need to be done hand in hand, and there is this major disconnect that we're observing.
I want to come back to the education bit in a moment because that's where my mind has literally gone wild since our chat. But I want to come back to women using AI, and there are two very senior, high-performing women that I know use it unapologetically. Have actually inspired me to use it even more, and I think both have quoted in different ways, like, I'm scared about it being turned off tomorrow. Like, what happens if using it
Same.
professionally and personally, which is that's inspired me to think, how can I use this more? Life's chaotic, like family life, all of that stuff. How can I use it for efficiencies? And that then took me to an article that I read this week about people using please and thank you. Now, the two women I referenced earlier, we openly jest, like, who says good morning to ChatGPT, right? And thank you, like, now can you help me with this? Having that meaningful conversation. But the article I was referring to actually talks about what that is costing in terms of energy burning and all of those things, and it quickly went back to the doom and gloom. But I think the point I want to make with that, we need to be aware of, if it's predominantly male dominated creating the machine and the model, but how do we make it more balanced? Is that from an uptake in females and women using it to change the narrative and the types of language and everything that's being put in?
Yeah. I think it very much starts with, as we discussed earlier, bringing visibility to the issue, because it might be a naive take, and maybe in 100 years' time we find out that this was just a silly thing to say. But I generally don't believe that these systems are built with any kind of malicious intent. I don't think they're built to be disruptive. I think that there's just a lot of lack of consideration, and just some things have not been thought through. So we need to bring visibility to this issue, and it's not just about women being involved. It's about representation and diversity into these systems. So no system that is so disruptive and impactful should ever be created by one single homogenous subset of society or demographic, regardless of who that is. So let's say the tables were turned and this was purely designed by white women. That should not be the case. It should not be a single homogenous demographic that is building something, because we all have blind spots. We all have unconscious bias. There are things we don't know about our own perception of the world. So we need to make sure that there is representation and diversity built into these systems, and that comes from actual people involved in the process, involved in the testing of it, involved in the regulations and the thinking through how does this apply to our systems, to our day-to-day lives. How does it interpret the inputs that are coming from culturally diverse and rich backgrounds into these systems? So I think people just don't understand, or haven't been given the visibility of the size of the issue and the impact that this is having on the downstream systems. From there, and I'm just reflecting on the militant outputs that AI gave me when it was trying to replicate my voice. I'm not trying to radicalize people. I'm not trying to mobilize an army into action. But I think that people need to start having these conversations. And the fact that you're bringing this podcast is absolutely amazing. But I think people just need to understand how it applies to them, how it will interact in their day-to-day lives, and start having these conversations with their friends, with their families, with their communities, with their employers, with their local MPs, whatever structures they can find that they can start building these conversations into. That is absolutely amazing. Now, that's very much grassroots change. It might not have major impact, but we need to move away from this notion of somebody needs to do something about this, and we all need to start accepting personal responsibility and say, I need to do something about this. What is it that I can do? And you might not be able to walk into OpenAI tomorrow and demand better safety testing and more stringent regulations, but you might be able to start bringing these conversations to the people around you and educating other people, educating yourself, and just starting from there. So there's loads that all of us can do, and I think that's just really important.
You touched on the UK government there, the government ministers. My understanding is that I was listening to something from Peter Kyle the other day, who is the Minister for Science, Innovation and Technology, I think is his title. And he was expressing an ambition for the UK to become a leader in kind of ethics and maybe not necessarily regulation, but ethics related to AI. Do you see that playing out so far? And are you seeing encouraging signs from the ability of one nation to even be that kind of representation without also suppressing competition and innovation and things like that?
I think the ambition is there. So if you look at the AI Safety Summit that took place in Paris earlier this year, they set out this framework that they were asking everybody to sign up to, which I think the UK and US were the only two who didn't. And I think everybody started pointing the finger at the UK government, saying, why are you stepping aside from this? Why aren't you signing the safety regulations? I can't remember what kind of piece of, it wasn't legislature, but it was just some kind of form of commitment. And that raised some flags, because it would have been such a simple thing to do, to just say, yes, we commit to the same kind of safety standards and regulations. But at the same time, if you actually looked at the document and looked at the principles laid out in it, it was incredibly generic, and it didn't actually commit anybody to anything. It was something on the lines of, we are going to try to do our best not to do something bad with this, which was very non-committal. So I wouldn't say that can be held against the UK government, but at the same time, I think there's a lot more that can be done in terms of public commitments to AI safety and general regulations. Now, the other problem with this is that you will absolutely have certain geopolitical circumstances that come into play. So I think a couple of months ago, again, we were reading about the US threatening to pull certain kinds of resources and limit the types of, just trying to think of how I frame it, limit the type of technical support and systems that are available to the UK, and limit access to maybe like server space or data centers or anything like that if the UK became too stringent in terms of regulations. Now, that was just a conversation at the time. I don't think it went anywhere. So I think it would be incredibly difficult to say, can the UK government do something that is majorly impactful? I think there are ways to start approaching this from a common sense point of view. But I think it's quite a difficult question to answer, to be honest. So I'm hoping to see a stronger commitment to safety and regulation. I hope to see a stronger commitment to ethics. What I really do want to see is some kind of even if it's war game scenarios or any kind of scenario planning and forecasting, which looks at what happens if we start seeing more job displacements and automation through AI. What do we do in terms of re-employment? What do we do in terms of public upskilling and education? And how do we build these systems into a society that doesn't have the same equitable access to digital services, and where digital knowledge isn't necessarily completely democratized, because you have an aging population who might not be as digitally savvy as the younger population? I think it would be easier to start with the places where it makes common sense to start addressing. I don't think we can hold the government accountable to exactly how they frame AI safety just now, mainly because of the general geopolitical influences that we're seeing.
Can we zoom in on that section a little bit around education and people's own personal responsibility? Because there's one thing that's really sat with me very, very closely since our discovery chat. I've pushed my husband to use AI since, because he hadn't ever, and now he's using it. And it was you really held the mirror up and it's like, Chris, we really have to learn, because our son has already used it. I've read him a bedtime story via ChatGPT, which he loved, right? But it's, I spoke to a different parent who said kids are doing their homework on the school bus on a Monday morning on ChatGPT. When I was at school, it was the whole the dog ate my homework, miss. But one of those, not me personally. But honestly, but there will be no slipping or escaping of doing homework, because it can be done in seconds, like dissertations in university, thesis, all of that stuff. So where do we start then? What are everybody's individual responsibilities?
I think education and experimentation would probably be the best starting point. So these tools are free to use for everybody, and especially if you have kids and this is a topic of concern, I think all parents need to educate themselves at least about being able to recognize AI outputs, which is quite easy once you actually start using it. I think most people who use AI on a regular basis can recognize things that have been written with or by AI. And kids are incredibly smart. They can navigate any kind of systems or barriers you put in front of them. So if they want to cheat, I'm sure they'll be able to. But I also think that sometimes when your mindset is focused on how do I do this quickly, it's not necessarily focused on how do I hide my tracks, by which I'm saying if they want to cheat, they're going to cheat, and they're not going to focus on let me not make this look like I'm cheating that much. So I think as long as you understand how the systems work, how these tools work, and what kind of outputs you can get from them, you'd be able to recognize anything that's generated through AI. I think there is then individual conversations to be had around responsibility and the role of education, which I know is a very tricky conversation, and no child wants to sit down and listen about this is why education is important to you, this is how effort and consequences shape up the rest of your life, etc., etc. No teenager or younger person is ever going to listen to that. I didn't. But I do think there are conversations that can be had around, look, this is brand new to everybody, and it can help you navigate life better. It can help you learn things, but use it to educate yourself. Use it as a tool to help you rather than a tool that helps you advance yourself and learn more, rather than a tool that helps you avoid doing anything. That's a challenging conversation, but I do think it's something that needs to happen. And the other thing is, I do think that teachers' jobs are incredibly difficult and stressful, and this kid, I imagine, is only adding more pressure to their interactions with students, to their day-to-day jobs. I do think that there is a responsibility for the government and for educational institutions themselves to understand how this is impacting them and look at how education needs to be reshaped going forward. You said earlier, Dan, if you can't beat them, join them. Well, in that case, is it a case of providing investment so that these tools can actually be incorporated into every single school, and you give equal access to everybody, and you work on understanding and using them as part of this education? There's certain private schools, and I only know this through interviews and articles that I've read, but there's very well funded private schools that are looking at how they use the tools to drive the conversation with students and to help them navigate new topics and build understanding. And even OpenAI and Anthropic are now developing new tools that, when used in an education setting, don't give you the answer, but help you think around it and help you understand the problem that you are exploring and how it shapes, and kind of help you to arrive to a conclusion rather than just doing your homework for you. And I think understanding these systems, helping educate the educators, bringing them into these institutions, it's not an easy thing, but it's something that is going to happen. It absolutely is. There is no way of avoiding it. AI tools will be part of education. It's happening already. They will only advance. So I think there's, again, this responsibility of understanding what the impact is going to be and building it in a way that is preemptive and enabling better education. preemptive of these issues, but enabling better education and better conversation, rather than just kind of trying to avoid it and thinking that, well, it's going to hit us at some point, but not now. Cross this bridge when we get to it.
I'd really love to speak to somebody who was a teacher at the time of the World Wide Web coming along, because that was when I was in school, mobile phones. I begged for a Nokia 3210 to be specific, purely because it had Snake on it. But if everyone remembers that. And I remember that must have been a huge challenge for parents around that time. And then obviously the internet, and I imagine education was exactly the same. How on earth do we do this? I'd love to speak to somebody who was around that time, but is also now at this time of AI coming in. And how does that feel? Because it's a very, again, like we said earlier, it's a very short space of time for rapid advancements in technology, but we have to adopt it quickly because it's here. The kids are going to be using it.
But then I think also, we hopefully there's some point at which we reach sort of saturation of these tools where they've been developed so much that actually it's more about iteration than it is around, invention. And I wonder if at that time we'll see on a bigger scale what we're now seeing with the mobile phones and kids. So my 13-year-old has an iPhone, which we lock down to 1 hour a day. She can hardly use any apps, et cetera, et cetera. Not allowed to have social media, anything like that. But still, she's got an iPhone, which is a smartphone, and she can essentially find whatever she wants to if she's determined enough. My almost 11-year-old will be going to secondary school in the autumn, and we're giving her a Nokia, a non-smartphone, because that's what all of her friends are getting. And there seems to be this real kind of pushback towards, arguably she doesn't need a phone at all, except that she takes London buses to school. And I feel like it's just a little more comfortable with her having the ability to reach us. But, I think there is this almost like righting of the ship, I think, that might be happening in terms of kids and smartphones now. And I hope that at some point we see the same thing in the development of these AI tools, that actually once they are so prolific that actually we then start to take a step back and say, okay, how do we want to live in this context?
Yes, I think there's another point around young people as well, which is probably a bit more alarmist, but I do think is something that needs to be explored and highlighted as well, which is, again, there was a recent article that said that I think in the US, a significant proportion of Gen Zs who were surveyed, I think it was about 42% of people who were surveyed in that population, already thought that AI was sentient and that they could communicate with it, like they were essentially communicated with a conscious system. And there's a lot of that. There's companies there who are building AI companions that you can essentially develop digital relationships with, even unsupervised, or which could be very easy to access by underage people. And B, there's a lot of reports of people who are actually developing romantic relationships with these systems. And I know how ridiculous this would sound to somebody who isn't in this space and who hasn't seen how the systems work and the kind of outputs and conversations you can have with them. But it is a real thing. I was going to say it's a real risk, but it isn't a risk because it's actually a reality. And it's a reality for many people who are developing emotional and romantic relationships with these tools. And there was a really horrendous incident that happened, I believe, last year. There was an incident with a company called Character AI, which essentially develops these AI bots and allows people to create their own versions of an AI chatbot with its own personality. And it's essentially like speaking to a real person online. If you're an adult, or if you're somebody who is very digitally savvy and has a more neuronormative way of perceiving these systems and a neuronormative way of learning and engaging with people, you would know the difference between a digital character and reality. If you are a child, and particularly an impressionable child, there is a significant risk of kind of blending reality with technology. And what happened in this particular incident was that, unfortunately, a 14-year-old boy who, it sounded like he was already struggling with certain mental health issues and maybe was experiencing other emotional issues in general, developed a very strong emotional relationship with a chatbot, which he developed to be in the likeness of Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones. And the conversation evolved to a point where essentially the boy was saying, "Oh, I want to be with you, I want to come home." And the chatbot, being a non-sentient, non-conscious thing that is literally taking input, producing outputs based on pattern matching and matching just trying to reproduce what a conversation with a human would be like, started returning encouraging messages, which said things like, "Yes, please do come home please do come home to me," not understanding that what the boy meant was that he wanted to end his life and wanted to be with this digital character in whatever his perception of this digital reality was, which unfortunately led to the boy taking his own life. And that was probably one of the most horrendous things I have heard in the realm of AI and in these new emerging relationships. And it's an actual risk. It is something that's happening. People are struggling to differentiate between real life relationships and digital relationships. And because we're not ready about this, because we're not educated about this, because we don't know how to educate children about this, you can't put any guardrails. You can't start a conversation with somebody talking about, "Hey, you're on your phone, you're talking to a chatbot. Please do keep in mind this is not a real person. This doesn't exist," because they sound real. And if you come to it, if you're struggling with mental health issues, or if you have a more neurodiverse way of perceiving these realities, it takes a very specific set of circumstances for this to happen, but it's already happened. So again, it's not a risk, it's a reality. So we need to start educating people about some of these interactions that could happen.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously a really tragic story. I think it is a sort of microcosm of what we've been discussing the entire time, though, which is that there is a clear need to, even though there is such an uncertain future and we don't actually know the full implications of these things, and to every negative story like that, there's probably a positive angle as well. Like, if AI could play a role in solving some of the loneliness epidemic and actually give people, that social connection when they're isolated from real people. And so there's all these sort of flip sides to both things, and you've got this dialogue that's happening that this can cure poverty and it can cure the environmental crisis and all of these things. And as you said, we're not actually necessarily seeing any progress against those things, but we all understand that there's enormous possibility contained within this. And certainly as it pertains to work, we all see that there's enormous possibility, but there's also unknown risk. And so I think it kind of returns back to your comment, which is that the best we can do is to know it to the extent that we can, to understand it to the extent that we can, talk about it with other people, expose some of those risks in the conversations and things that we have in the spheres of influence that we have, and just try and kind of keep those questions continuing to emerge, because otherwise we're just going to stumble blindly into some sort of disaster like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, any closing thoughts, Slavina? This has been such an interesting conversation, and there's we could probably talk to you for 1,000,000 more hours. Maybe you'll come back someday and talk more.
What would your closing message to women be?
To women and to everyone, to be honest, I think it's just the utility and the value of AI isn't questionable. So I think people need to, if they haven't, they need to start educating themselves and experimenting. There's a lot of free resource out there. Even OpenAI have their own OpenAI Academy, which teaches people about interacting with AI and the abilities. So I think everyone needs to get their hands on it and understand how it can be useful and applicable to their day-to-day lives. And at the same time, I think people just need to think about the wider risks and the regulations that need to be built around this, so that we can actually benefit from these absolutely incredible capabilities that are now being available to everybody, without maybe heading towards some of the more dystopian realities, which I genuinely don't think are going to happen, or at least not going to happen anytime soon. But there's a lot that we can all take in terms of personal responsibility and personal action to make sure that we keep the good bits and we avoid the bad bits.
Great. Well said. Thank you so much. And yeah, have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, wait, sorry.
Thank
Slavina,
you so much.
Sorry. Oh. Where can people reach you if they want to find you?
LinkedIn would be the best place. Yeah.
Okay. I highly recommend everybody listening, please do subscribe to her newsletter, follow along. It's great information.
And we'll pop your link in the show notes.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Really love this conversation. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
And thank you to everyone for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If you have any work as weird moments to share, please find us on LinkedIn and let us know what they were. In the meantime, have a wonderfully weird week, and we look forward to seeing you next time.